So like you saw in the email we sent, we will be covering 3 sessions today. First, we'll be looking at introduction to risk suppliers assessment and quality assessment. And then afterwards, we'll move on to data extraction, how to extract data seamlessly for
Hello, please, you are not sharing your screen. It's only your BioSketch that is on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, but you cannot see my screen.
We only see your BioSketch, but what you are talking on, the slide is not moving.
Okay, so no slides yet. We are not on the slides yet. So when the presenter starts the session, you will see slides.
Thank you.
All right. So lastly, the last session for today will be on performing meta-analysis. So we'll have 2 in-person facilitators and 1 virtual facilitator. So we'll be doing practical or hands-on activities, and in the course of today's sessions, you will be divided, just like yesterday, into teams to try out some of these processes yourself. And we are also committed to supporting you throughout the process. It's not only going to end today, so we'll try as much as possible to see how we can share further resources and start a mentorship program that can actually move you into the practical aspects of everything that we have been doing. Thank you very much. So for today, or this morning, we have Dr. Kusi Mensah. Dr. Kusi is a psychiatrist with additional training in child and adolescent mental health. He's based in KTH, Kumasi. He's a part-time senior lecturer at the Behavioral Science Department, KNUST, Kumasi. Dr. Kusi is a Commonwealth scholar at the University of Cambridge, United Kingdom, where he has just successfully defended his thesis, which looked at developing culturally appropriate tools for accessing executive functioning for children and adolescents in West Africa. As part of this, he published 2 highly cited scoping exercise newspapers for all Western EA tools adapted for use in his work has been featured in local Cambridge. Of course, some of these components sounds well. We will share the screen, please. We'll share the screen, but I just want to be sure the sound is okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, please permit me to invite Dr. Kusi to take for this session. Thank you very much. Yeah, everybody else here.
Thank you very much. Can I ask us to come, for those who are at the back, if you can come a bit to the center, so I can have more focused interaction. Otherwise, I'll miss you in my peripheral vision and not be able to talk to people. Okay, my slides. Yes. Yes. Okay, so whilst we are moving, maybe a few introductory remarks. So, as I said, my name is Kwabena Kusi Mensah. I'm a psychiatrist and also a child adolescent mental health professional. Don't worry, I know you've been bombarded with a lot of health people, so I'm going to be intentional about trying to bring wider perspectives other than health-related examples, but the bias is still towards health, so I apologize in advance. Okay, fantastic. Right, I think we can go now. So, oh, sorry, all the slides are supposed to hide. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about, this will be the outline that I'll follow. I think we'll go with a quick overview. Unfortunately, I've not been able to tune in to many of the sessions, but I'm sure you would have covered what systematic reviews are, things like, how to formulate your questions, so on and so forth. But I'll just, for completeness sake, spend 2 minutes recapping an overview of what the systematic review process is. what the systematic review process is. And then, but I'm going to focus mainly on the purpose and the principles of quality assessment and risk of bias assessment. As you probably have noticed, there's a very wide array of people taking part in this workshop. And so, I mean, even though the organizers asked me to focus a bit on RCT, I felt because of the wide array of people who are taking part in this workshop, it will be a bit of a service focusing on just RCTs, because not, in fact, I suspect that most of us who are probably at the early career to mid-career level, we are not going to be conducting randomized control trials. That's a very sophisticated research that I usually try to hear people do. And so I'm going to try and keep the focus as broadly as possible on the principles, because you will discover very quickly that I'm sure you've been told up to now that systematic reviews are very complex endeavors. You know, when I started, I'll tell you a quick story how I got into it. So it was 2019, 2020. I started my PhD in 2019, moved over to Cambridge, very starry-eyed, you know, enjoying myself. And then 2020, COVID hits. And I have 3 months to produce a first-year report. And for those who don't have a UK system works, your first-year report is basically where you get confirmed into the PhD. So after that, you are a provisional PhD, so you have to prove yourself. And the standard of the university is that you're supposed to produce master's level work, something that would qualify for a Cambridge master's degree. And then COVID, so nobody's going anywhere. So I was basically ready to tear out my head, like, oh, my village people have followed me to this England. So then I had the right idea. My supervisor was like, oh, okay, you know, since you are told you're going to be in Pamela, why don't you just do a scoping review? What's the point? I was like, what's that? So don't worry, just go on your desk and do a couple of things, and it'll be all right, it'll be all right. Little did I know, that man was lying to me. I think it was what I was like, okay, fine, I found the solution. So I thought scoping review is like a normal literature review. I just went and picked articles and I started going into it. And I realized, hey, I don't count. I'm telling you, it was crazy. I mean, by the time I'd already committed. So by the time I got into it and did my abstract screening, got like 5,000 abstracts, it was just me. And I managed to recruit about 5 of my colleagues in Ghana to be the second reviewers, reviewing 5,000 abstracts. I mean, I was doing 16-hour days. I wake up at 7, I sit on my desk, I do eat bath, everything by 9. I don't leave till 11. It was mad. I'll never encourage it because I have to do it in less than 3 or 4 months to produce my first year report. So bottom line is it's a lot of work. Never underestimate it. In fact, the medical librarian warned me when she asked me, and I told her I'm going to do a systematic review. She said, "Oh, this was around March." She said, "Oh, so you are publishing, you are going to analyze in November." I said, "November, I'm producing the thing by June." She said, "Oh, you are mad, you can't do it." She said, "Minimum of 6 months is the minimum time for any basic properly done systematic review, generally speaking, you know." So the point of this is that this is a lot of work, and you quickly discover that no single systematic review is the same, depending on what type of systematic review it is that you are doing. I did mine in, I did a review of assessment tools, so tools that have been validated. So it was validation studies. And so that's a completely different risk of bias assessment that you're going to do. There's a whole tool for that. Same thing with, if you're out, I'll have a slide on that, various tools that you're doing for different things. If you're doing randomized control trial, there's a whole tool for it, which you have to learn. If you're going to do even non-randomized trials, there's one called the Robbins I, you know, so on and so forth. And each of these, with my own, unfortunately for me, was 2 guidelines to do validation, just validation studies, content validation, systematic review alone. The manual was 75 pages long. And then for all other validation studies, it was another 78 pages long. I had to master those manuals. So I'm saying all of this to say that you won't learn everything about risk of bias in 30 minutes or 1 hour in this lecture. I'm just going to give you the principles. What do you need to understand? What is risk of bias, or what is quality assessment? What's the difference? And then I'm going to try and point you to the direction of where can you find potentially tools. I mean, now with Google and even all these, ChatGPT and all AI stuff, it's very easy, but there are some authoritative places where you can find the appropriate tool. Because your risk of bias assessment will depend on the kind of study you are looking at or the kind of systematic review you are doing. What kind of studies are you looking at? You have to understand what so I'm just lowering expectations so that you don't expect that by the end of today you become an expert in doing risk of bias assessment per se. So yeah, so that's basically the outline that I'm going to follow. Trying to stop control limits. Okay, yeah, so this will be the learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, you should know to understand the reason for a place of quality assessment and then risk of bias, know the difference between the terms, because I understand in previous workshops, that was quite a big issue. I'm hoping you'll be able to appreciate the approach to and principles underlying the risk of bias assessment, like I mentioned. Have a broad overview of various risk of bias assessment tools. Don't worry, we will do the activity, we will decompose a little bit. So I picked 2 papers that are central. So we'll do like maybe 2 domains of an RCT paper, just so you understand how the practical aspect of how it works. And then we'll do 2 domains of what I did, 2 validation papers. So in case, I'm sure many of you, especially in a part of the world where we don't create our own tools, most of the time we are taking Western tools and quote unquote adapting them in Ghana or Nigeria or wherever, which country you are in. You know, a very important part of that process is to make sure that the tool has been properly validated. So there's a good chance that many of you who are, you know, at the early or mid level career of your mid stage of your career are going to be needing to do some sort of tool validation, systematic review, basically to answer the question, what are the best tools that have been adapted in so and so field for Ghana or for Nigeria or Kenya or wherever. Okay, so during the activities that we'll do just 2 domains or 1 or 2 domains, depending on time, just so you have a feel for the different types of risk of bias assessment tools there are and how to go about them. And then there's, like I said, you have to go through where to find them. Yeah, so I always like to start with this route. Whenever I talk about systematic reviews, why do we do a systematic review? In fact, research generally, this famous quote by Professor Deming said, "In God we trust, so all others must bring data." You know, the American, their money is, you know, in God we trust that, you know, all others must bring data. You don't trust any other body, anybody's opinion of you. We don't do science of scholarship by opinion. You know, in the hospital, we say by evidence-based medicine. There's an eminent professor. He says it's like this, so this is it. No, those days are past. It is evidence-based. That so it doesn't matter who you are, even if you are the junior most, well, in Ghana, of course, we are still doing evidence-based, but that's not how it should be. It should be about evidence-based. What is the evidence, the scientific evidence, or the data supporting whatever it is that you are saying? And because tons of data have been generated, most likely in the field that you are in, you need to find some way of synthesizing that data and deciding what is the quality of the data. And that's what risk of bias assessment is. For the religious ones amongst you, the read about believe not every spirit, but test the spirits whether they are of God, whether they are of the God of science or someone's opinion. So I'm pretty sure that you are all familiar with this definition. A systematic review is basically an attempt to identify, appraise, and synthesize all the empirical evidence that meets pre-specified eligibility criteria to answer a given research question. Okay, so the point is that you are going through in a very rigorous or systematic way, trying to find all that has been said about a topic. But not just that, because if you are just finding what has been said about a topic, then you have done the scoping review. Sorry, if you are finding what has been said about a topic in a systematic way, that's where scoping review stops. If you are going to evaluate what has been said in a rigorous way, so you're going to do a critical appraisal of what has been said. So you're not just going to say, oh, I've looked under every rock in every published database for what has been published about this subject. And so says this, so says this, so says this. That's a scoping review. But I'm going to say, I've looked after in every published database found all that has been said. Now, based on this ABCD criteria, which is the risk of bias assessment, this thing that this person said, we can believe it. This thing that this person said, maybe not so much. This thing that this person said, high quality evidence, yes. So therefore, at the end of the day, then you now give an opinion based on all that has been written and based on the quality of the research that was done. I think, or we think, we the authors think, XYZ is the best evidence for this. Please, I hope you understand. That's what makes it a systematic review. Because you've done a critical appraisal. You didn't just passively assemble all the information and summarize it and tell people what has been done. But you assessed the quality of the work that was done, both in terms of the methodology and the results. And so it is the assessment of the methodology that is what we call a quality assessment and or a risk of bias assessment. I'll show you the difference shortly. Okay, so without a risk of bias assessment, you've not done a systematic review. If you've not done a critical appraisal of some sort, you've not done a systematic review, you are still in the realms of literature review, just that you've done an advanced literature review, which is what we call a school review. Is that what we are? Okay, fantastic. So, yeah, so the point of all of this, these are the key aspects of what makes it a systematic review. To identify, you appraise, you synthesize, and you must say what your methods were explicitly so that people can replicate your search. The idea is that anybody should be able to replicate your search using the parameters you use and come to the same conclusion or find the same papers, analyze it the same way and come to the same conclusion. That's what makes it systematic. Okay, and like I said, I showed you my little anecdote. It's not quick. If you want to do that kind of crazy grueling thing, do a systematic review with 3.5 months. No, but yeah, I literally got sick. I felt I had to take like 2 weeks off after that, and never. So I'll never advise everybody to do it. Never underestimate the amount of work it is. And it's interesting because in a lot of places, like unfortunately in our college, in the postgraduate medical college, for example, both Ghana College, West African College, for some reason, systematic reviews are not recognized as like real work. Yeah, I'm sure in other places it's like that. So like you can't do a systematic review for your fellowship thesis. I think that's unfortunate, and I feel like it's because those who make the decision haven't done some before. That's why. If you've done some, you know that this is master's level. Is enough to be given a master's degree, or if it's been done and done properly, that it's not some wishy-washy, something. So it's a lot of work. Is what I'm trying to say. I can't highlight it enough. It's not a substitute to a literature review. Okay, so please, if you know you don't have like 6 months minimum to dedicate to that, usually maybe in the first year of your PhD or something. And then just say you do a narrative review or a literature review. Don't go and commit yourself like I did and make my mistake. Yeah, so I think this slide, I'm sure other people have shown it, the hierarchy of evidence, systematic reviews and meta-analysis are right there at the very top precisely because you are taking data not just from one study or one area, but you're synthesizing all the data that's currently available as of the time you did the review across many populations and synthesizing that. So this is the grand scheme of systematic review. This is the general process. This is my own summary of it. I didn't get this from anywhere. So usually you write the protocol where you define a specific objective, set strategy. Okay, yeah. I should that home because my slides are plenty. Okay, I'll see that. I know I have about 30 minutes to deliver this. I think I have 20 minutes. Okay. So yeah, so first thing is usually when you write a protocol, which that's where you decide, okay, this is the topic I want to study, you do your PICO, I'm trying to do about PICO and all of that, yeah. So you break all of that down. Then the next thing is you now start the search. But usually, I'm sure those who have told you about search will advise that you should probably do a preliminary search to get a sense of what is out there so that you can tweak your search strategy, tweak your questions. It's usually a good idea. Although all these how do you call them? These websites where you're supposed to register your protocol beforehand. You're supposed to register your protocol before you're supposed to start the search officially. So, like for example, Prospero in the UK is considered best practice. The idea is that the reason we are supposed to register your protocol is that you want to avoid the appearance of bias for a very simple reason. So because systematic review is so high up there in terms of the hierarchy of the ladder of evidence, we want, there should be no appearance of bias. So we don't want a situation where somebody says, well, I'm doing a systematic review. Maybe they have some predetermined outcome. Maybe they want to do a review of maybe a drug or an intervention let's say in agribusiness. So they want to do some social science intervention, want to do cash transfers for entrepreneurial women. And because you have, maybe your center is a center that pioneered a particular intervention. So you want to say that cash transfers are the best, or they are giving fertilizers to farmers in the village is the best. And you say, okay, I'm going to do a systematic review. And then when you go and do the review, you realize that no, cash transfers is not the best. There are better other methods. And then you now go back and tweak your search strategy to exclude. This is what I mean. So that's why Cochrane and all the other and the authority systematic review actually now insists that you should have written your protocol, deposited it somewhere. So like a third party, Prospero, there are other places. And then that before you've done the search, and then when you've done the search and done your study and published it, people can go and compare what you actually did and published with what you said you would do. So I don't know if you tweet your process somewhere to try and get some predetermined outcome. That's the idea. And so that's one of the things you are supposed to do. So I registered my Prospero. So I'm mentioning this now because, yeah, even though they say, in fact, they're very strict that you are not supposed to have done the search before you register it. I mean, but for practical purposes, you need to know what the size of work you're about to do. So maybe like a quick preliminary search, not a full search, a quick preliminary search of a few key databases to see, oh, is it 20,000 abstracts or is it just 300? Then you can plan better, you know. So yeah, so then you go in and then do your once you finalize, deposited your protocol, etc., blah blah, and then now you run your search, first stage abstract screening. You do your second abstract screening, and the other thing is that I'm sure this has been covered, but it's best that ideally two reviewers minimum, you know, just for quality assurance sake, you know, so you don't miss anything and that kind of thing. So you do the abstract screening and everything, do your second abstract screening, where you pick out where you aren't sure whether if the abstract didn't have the information you needed to know whether this is an eligible paper, then you go on to your full paper screening. So you have to draw all those abstracts which were MBAs, which were question mark, get a full paper, and then again, two reviewers review, pick out the data of the eligibility criteria that you made, do that screening. If you now get your eligible papers, and then you do your full analysis. So you are going to do your data extraction first, which is, the first thing of that is basically that initial data extraction you can use to write a scoping review. So the key variables or things that you are interested in, you extract that into whatever Excel or whatever, it's Covidence or whatever you're using. And then your next level of data extraction is where the data that you need to make your risk of bias assessment, which I'll talk about today. So you do two levels of data extraction. Sometimes even three, depending on what you're looking at, but your initial one is what. So for those who are quantitative research bias, think of your initial data extraction as sort of like your descriptive statistics. So when you do your survey, initially you do your frequencies, percentages, mean to mean ratio, that type of thing. It's something similar. You're just describing your data in your initial data extraction. You know, I got so number of papers from this website, and from this database, X percentage was this. Then your next data extraction is where now you come to analyze the methods, the results, whether good quality based on the criteria of the checklist. Sorry, not checklist, the assessment tool that you have selected to do that. So you extract that data, analyze it. So you extract the data, analyze it, and then come to some sort of either qualitative or quantitative conclusion. If you reanalyze the data, that's where you are talking about the meta-analysis. I'm sure there's somebody who talk about meta-analysis this workshop. If you just analyze the methods and the results, that's when you are doing a critical appraisal and therefore it's systematic review. So that's the wrong difference between systematic review and meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, you put together data from the different research. So you ask the original authors for permission to analyze the data and read the meta-analysis. And it's in their best interest because it means their work is getting out. Then you reanalyze with a larger sample and that kind of thing. Just as an aside. Yeah, so you do that, then you do your critical appraisal, which is over here. So what we are talking about today is that portion where you are doing the critical appraisal of the methods and the results. Yeah. Okay. We are working on the sound, so
sometimes try to
there's another microphone.
the online.
Ah, okay, all right. Okay. Please, I hope those online can hear me. Let me confirm. And those in the room, you can hear me.
Yeah, I think it's better now. Yeah, it's better now. People are saying
It's better.
you should slow down.
Better.
I'll just use this and then I'll project. If anybody can see me, please let me know. They just raise your hand. Okay. All right. So where we are, or what you're talking about in this talk, is the critical appraisal and then the synthesis. Because after you've appraised, and let me explain something here so you get the picture well. You are going to appraise individual papers and individual studies. What do we mean? It's a bit confusing. I found it confusing myself when I was first learning about it, but think about it this way. Generally, when we think of studies, we think of a study as a single paper or manuscript or article as containing one study, but not necessarily so when it comes to a critical appraisal or a risk of bias assessment. So for example, let me use a case of, let's say, tool validation. Sometimes some researchers can do multiple things within one paper. And in the context of a risk of bias assessment, we call each of those things a study. So you can have multiple studies in one paper. So for example, let's say I'm doing a validation, I'm assessing, let's say somebody says I'm going to validate a tool for social networks for entrepreneurial women, or a tool for depression, right? And then in that assessment, they now do, in that validation, they do a content validation, which is a type of validation. They do structural validation or structural validity. They do cross-cultural validation. Don't worry about these things, but there are different types of validations that you can do. In the context of a critical appraisal, each of these validations is a study on its own that you are going to appraise. So you are going to appraise the methods that was done for each of these types. I hope you understand. And then, or maybe let's use an RCT, for example. Sometimes, there are different types of RCTs. There can be very complex studies where one part of the study, they did a randomized control trial, and then they do something like a crossover at some point, they call them crossover studies, so on and so forth. In that context, if you are critically appraising them, you are going to consider the part of the study that before the crossover as a separate study. When the crossover is also a separate study, something like that, where whenever you have a manuscript or a paper that is reporting 2 or 3 different things that can be distinctly appraised by themselves, where those distinct things are what we call individual studies. And I'm mentioning this because it is in that context that you see that after critically appraising them, you have to synthesize all your findings. So basically, you are going to synthesize, is like you are summarizing your findings. So you've done the critical appraisal of, in one paper, all the multiple studies, or maybe a better example. Let's say one paper for the validation, one paper looked at 2 different tools. You are trying to answer the question, which assessment tool is best for use in Ghana? And then one paper maybe did a validation of ABC tools. You are going to assess their methods and the results for tool A, tool B, tool C as separate studies. That's another way of looking at it. And then another paper also looked at, let's say, tool A, tool B, and maybe tool F. You are going to extract the data for tool A and tool B in paper 2, extract the data for tool A and tool B in paper 1, and synthesize. So at the end of the day, you are going to sort of like synthesize or summarize what were the findings for tool A across different papers, tool B across different papers. I hope you understand. And then because the point is that you want to recommend that, this is the best adapted tool for this setting, or this is the best, this intervention has the best evidence in this setting. So it may be one, let's say cash transfer, for example, that may be the intervention, but it has been done. Each paper looked at more than just one. Maybe they looked at cash transfer, they looked at, so in the case of, let's say you're looking at how do you encourage women entrepreneurs to be more productive? Somebody says, give them cash transfer. Somebody says, no, give them counseling so that their marital problems are solved. Somebody says, whatever. You're going to evaluate all those ones. One paper looked at all those things and maybe compared 2 of them. Another paper looked at just one So you are extracting, you are assessing each of the interventions across different papers. Please, I hope that's clear. So that's where the synthesis comes in. After you have evaluated, so in paper 1, you evaluated their methods for doing it, you evaluated their results. In paper 2, they looked at a different combination, but you're also going to extract each of this data. Then you now summarize it across each intervention or each tool or each, whatever, and then you're going to grade the evidence and say that, let's say for cash transfers, the evidence seems to, all the papers seem to report a good effect or a positive effect on productivity. However, the quality of that evidence is high or medium or low because of XYZ. Once you do that, you have done a critical appraisal. That's the end of. So in fact, I can stop the lecture now. I'm kidding, I'll stop now. But that's in a nutshell. I'm just trying to give you an overview of what you are doing in a critical appraisal in terms of going into the weeds or the nitty-gritty of it. Okay, so in the scheme of the whole process of a risk of a systematic review, we are handling, 1 hour. We are handling just 2 aspects or 2 components. And it's after you've synthesized the results and graded the quality of evidence, then you are going to write up in your discussion and say that, based on this systematic review, we think the best available evidence there out here suggests that cash transfers are the most effective intervention to improve the quality of output for entrepreneurial women, or maybe fertilizers, giving fertilizers to farmers is the best intervention. So that is the whole idea in a nutshell. So what are we seeking to do in a risk of bias assessment? Basically, and I've hinted at it, you are trying to see, can we trust these results? Are these results, or are these, you are being very critical of the papers with a very, very critical eye than usual, than in your normal journal club situation. You are, in a very systematic way, you are being very critical of the information and scrutinizing their methods. So like depending on the context, for example, did they use the correct sample size? Did they use the correct analysis method? Maybe they were supposed to do, I don't know, student t-test or logistic regression, and instead they did a linear regression. Is that correct? Those kinds of things, and all that will be determined by the type of studies that you are analyzing in your systematic review. And more importantly, the risk of bias assessment tool, the criteria by which you are assessing them by. But it's all to answer the question, can I trust these results? You are also asking yourself, to answer that question, you're asking yourself, is the methodology sound? Did they use the correct methods, both in terms of data collection? So like we've seen in RCT, for example, we'll talk a lot about randomization. Did they properly randomize and make sure that the parties were randomly distributed between the treatment arm or the intervention arm and then the control arm and that kind of thing? Are the reported results therefore trustworthy? Because it's based on, giggle, garbage in, garbage out, isn't it? If you use nonsense methods, it doesn't matter how great the results you are getting sound. The results are therefore not trustworthy. And that's where your synthesis and grading of the quality of evidence comes in. And then even if you say, okay, the results are trustworthy, the question is, how trustworthy are they? So compared to other methods. So for example, and that's where, for example, you may come out and say, all the papers that have worked on cash transfers seem to say that they are good or they have a positive effect on output. However, most of the studies had poor methodology and therefore it's rubbish. So it's low quality evidence for a good outcome. That's one potential summary. Or you may find that it's a mixed bag. Some of them had good methods, and that's usually the case. Some of them had good methods, some of them had poor methods. So you may come out and say, well, there's moderate quality of evidence to support cash transfers as an effective way of boosting, So that's what we might have trustworthy, as opposed to maybe a different method. Maybe they say, we find that if instead of giving the women cash transfers, you give them, let's say, training, some focused entrepreneurial training, bookkeeping skills, that rather has, a huge impact on their productivity. And all the studies that are saying that or have drew that conclusion were of top quality. They use the right methods, right sample, blah, blah, blah. So yes, cash transfers may have some moderate quality evidence, but maybe bookkeeping or training, skills training model has high quality evidence. So therefore, skills training is more trustworthy. The results from that is more trustworthy than cash transfer. That's the idea. That is the question you are trying to answer, or that's the end goal you are trying to reach in whatever systematic review you are doing. You are going to offer an opinion piece that is based on critical appraisal of the available evidence, as opposed to a scoping review where, or even a literature review where you didn't critically appraise, you are just telling them what the people said and not offering any opinion as an author, whether it is rubbish or it is cogent, is solid. I mean, to put it bluntly. Okay. So now let's talk about the differences between quality assessment and risk of bias. In fact, here, and maybe when I go in a bit further, you help me to exit and then I'll demonstrate a bit, because it's so key, because it causes quite a bit of confusion. And when I went into it, I understand why it's causing a lot of confusion, because really, I think it's really a matter of semantics. Some assessment tools treat the two terms as if it's the same thing, but there is a fine difference, a technical difference. And this is it. So I'm saying all this to say that don't get too hung up on it. Like, it's not, if you, in an academic setting, yes, I mean, if maybe like an MCQ, is there a difference between quality assessment and risk of bias? Yes, there's technically a difference, but in reality or in practice, you will do all. If you are doing a proper critical appraisal, you will do both anyway. There's no, I can't imagine any critical appraisal process where you do quality assessment and stop there and not do risk of bias. You've not completed it. I don't understand. So it becomes a matter of like a pedantic or an academic affair. So even if you don't understand, there's not too. That's I'll explain it. So quality assessment, think about it in simple terms as you are evaluating the quality of the methods. Okay. That's what you are doing in the quality assessment. You are evaluating the overall quality and reliability of the studies included in the review. And here you are focused more on the methodology that was used to arrive at that. So that's where you're going to do, so your tool or your checklist is going to say, did they use the right sample size? Did they use the right analysis? Did they randomize, blah, 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 all of those, study design, etc., etc. Whereas in risk of bias, you are focused more on the results. Are the results based on the method, whether the results based on the methodology, quality of the study are trustworthy? So in a risk of bias assessment, the focus is more on, after they use these methods, the results that they are reporting, can we trust it? And that's what I'm saying, that it's two sides of the same coin, because garbage in, garbage out. If your methods is bad, then it doesn't matter how great your results are, you can't trust it. Another way, I should say that a risk of bias also specifically evaluates the potential for systematic errors. That's a technical definition. That's what we call bias. And bias is a systematic error, isn't it? Where the results that you are getting is skewed in some way or the other, unnaturally. That's one way of thinking about it. So think about it this way. From your quality assessment, you are going to, of necessity, do a risk of bias assessment. Bias is deviation from the truth. So for example, if you use, let's say, a skewed, let me give a good example. And I'm sorry, this one to come from health. If, let's say, you are testing two drugs and you want to see, is drug A better than drug B? Drug A is the one you are interested in. That's the new drug, maybe say a pharmaceutical company or whatever. And then you want to test it against your competitor, or maybe placebo. No treatment, sugar water. And then in your allocation of participants, you intentionally put those who are very sick, the most sick people on your competitor's drug arm. So let's say I've invented a new headache drug, pain medication. Let's call it Kusi APC. And then we are testing it against paracetamol or Tylenol. And then I put those who have the most severe headache in the Tylenol arm. And then I put those who are moderate to in my drug arm. And then I come and say, those in my treatment arm have 30% or 50% effect size healing. Everybody gets well. Do you see a problem with that? Yeah, because I've tilted compared to paracetamol only that's 10%. But paracetamol that's only 10% or 10% because I put the most sick people there. You understand? So that is a skewing. That's what you call a bias. You have tilted the scale in one way or the other. Usually it's not as nefarious or as intentional as I'm making it sound, but just to illustrate the point. Sometimes it's inadvertent. For example, if you allow people to select which arm of the study they are going to go into, let's say the same drug study, okay? Those who are most sick and have lost all hope are more likely to self-select into the new treatment arm because the old drug is not working. That's why they are joining the study, isn't it? So that's a more common example. If you don't allow, you don't blind, and so we'll talk about blinding RCTs. You don't blind those that you allow people to select or choose where they want to go into. So in that situation, you can have a situation where you can draw a conclusion like an intervention has no effect, but the study shows an effect. So in actual fact, maybe your drug or drug A is no better than paracetamol. It's just as good, or maybe slightly worse. But because you skewed it, you say, oh, paracetamol has a better effect. When in actual fact, and so your study is showing a better effect than the standard treatment or placebo. When in actual fact, it has no effect. Okay. And in that situation, that's where we talk about precision versus accuracy. So I think this is a very good illustration, what we have up here. Okay. Your results may be accurate. So the accurate, you are trying to hit the target. So you may get roughly, depending on if there's bias, you may get some sort of accurate target, but it's not precise. It's very, for example, if you don't use an adequate sample size, okay, it will not give you the most precise results. Whereas look at target 2. This is a very precise result, but it's not accurate. It's precise because all the hits are around the same point. You can see that, but it's not accurate because it's off target. So this is an example of a study that will tell you, oh, all the people enrolled in this study or this new drug is like we say, it's like Acubam or all these all these herbalism. It will cure headache. It cures everything, Sam. So, but the question is that, are we sure? Has there been randomization? How do we know? Do you understand? So, oh, Asibesi took it and they went away and they came to give testimony. What's the problem with that? How do you know it's your drug? How do you know it's not something else that the person went to? That's why that's the problem with these. With a lot of these people who push like herbal products. It's not that fundamentally it's not possible that the active ingredients don't work. That's not the point. But the point is that has it been studied in a systematic or a rigorous way? I mean, actually, in fact, the so-called this is a bit of a tangent, but it's my pet peeve when, especially in Africa, we create sort of like a false dichotomy between white man's medicine and maybe before or black man medicine. For me, it doesn't make any sense. Nature is nature. God made everything. And which medicine in this world was not created from some plant or some natural thing that it was extracted from? All the medicines that we take, that so-called white man medicine, it's from natural product. Artemisinin was taken from some herb in China and so on and so forth. The only difference is that it's been refined. The active ingredient has been taken out. I feel that rather we as Africans should rather devote ourselves to being really good with science, including systematic reviews, and studying our plants, studying our drugs, and extracting because the things that every plant also has some poisons. We act as if our forefathers went out and randomly just took any leaves and brought it home. They were knowledgeable to know that there are some mushrooms that will kill you. This is for food. This is for so why do we act as if everything natural is good? I don't know if you get the point I'm making. Even our forefathers, so it's a false dichotomy, it's a false fight. Where it's like, oh, you people are brought full school, so like white man's medicine, black medicine. And that's what we do. And if we keep with that mindset, we'll always be behind. You get the point I'm making. Anyway, so that's a bit of a tangent. But the point is that we need more randomized control trials and the ability to do systematic review and to, in a very systematic way, dispassionately, because that's the other issue with all this, the herbalists. They are emotionally involved. Their own their great-grandfather taught them this. So they are emotionally invested in this thing must work, which as a scientist, you're not supposed to do. You can believe your hypothesis, but you should be dispassionate enough to recognize if your results are showing that your thing that you believe in or your intervention that you think should work is not working. That's why you must use as objective methods as possible. And that's why in systematic reviews, somebody else must check your work and critically appraise all that you've done to see whether or not you did all the right things that you did, okay, all the right things that you're supposed to do, okay. So another way of looking at difference between quality assessment and risk of bias. We look in quality assessment, we look at things like the appropriateness of the study design. You know, so like I said, if did you use proper randomization, so on and so forth in an RCT? Sample size, I talk about that quite a bit. Methods of data collection. We see that a lot. So interviewer administered, and then the TA went to sit somewhere and then he filled all the thing. You look at the distribution of data, like, this thing doesn't look normal or natural. How did you collect data? Or more seriously, so like for us in mental health, for example, if you are going to be talking about a very stigmatizing topic, let's say maybe HIV status or trauma, child abuse, and then you collect your data and then you go and sit in bedroom, people everywhere, then you say, Mommy, did anybody insert their hand into your vagina when you were young? Do you expect people to, do you get the point I'm making? So the methods of your data collection matter. And these are the things that you are going to appraise in a systematic review. If you are reviewing somebody else's work, how did they collect the data? Was it appropriate for the topic, for the setting? You get the point. Statistical analysis. I mean, that one, I'm sure there are biostats here who are more qualified than me to talk about this, but you can't use, as for statistics, you can put whatever input you want and to give you results. Whether it's the correct results or not is another question. You get the point. So you must use the correct analytical methods. A quick example that we'll do when we get to the activity. So for example, if you are doing a structural validity or structural validation, you are supposed to use either an exploratory factor analysis or a confirmatory factor analysis. It will amaze you how many people did what you call a principal component analysis, like completely wrong analysis method. And they publish that, we validated. And, we'll see that when we look at it, so it's a completely wrong analysis method. And so whatever results that you are getting means nothing. Consistency of findings, generalizability of results, adequacy of follow-up. So like in an RCT, randomized control trial, how long did you follow up the people? So I said I've produced KUSI APC and I'm testing it against paracetamol. And then I only followed up those in my treatment arm for 3 days. But then those in the paracetamol arm, I followed them up for 6 weeks because I want to show that after a while, the headache came back. But my own, after 3 days, and I left them alone because, the headache is gone, end of story. So there are different ways people can try and like tilt the scale to, well, it's not always intentional, but the point is that you should have adequate follow-up, especially in an RCT, over a long enough period to establish that indeed your treatment has worked. There's not just, a quick, again, side example, all these, so I'm a Christian, so, but because I'm come to bash some excesses in Christianity. So like you see in a big, crusade, they'll say, we've prayed for this person. The person has said, they'll bring them and say, hey, I had this pain over here. And the man of God prayed for me. The pain has gone. Praise God, hallelujah. Nobody follows up to check whether the following day does the pain come back. And there are many ways for that. You see a lot of documentaries where they prayed, and in the heat or the height of the moment, it's called placebo. Endorphins and things will numb pain. So it's not that they are lying, but maybe they have cancer or something, and then they have abnormal pain. They pray in the heat after all, praying to God and things. I mean, not to say that miracles are not there. Please, I'm not commenting on that. I beg you. I'm a Christian myself.
Where do I buy food?
And my IACF colleagues are here, so they know that I'm not lying. But unfortunately, these excesses are there. Do you see what I mean? And that speaks to the point of follow-up. So in a proper scientific study, you must follow them up over an adequate enough period of time to show that indeed your cure has truly worked and has worked for the period that is considered standard, in the industry. Reporting clarity and transparency. So those are the types of things that we are generally assessing in quality assessment. Okay, so if you are given an intervention to farmers and you say your particular brand of fertilizer is better than the standard, and then you don't follow up over the full cycle of the harvest period, you just like, okay, it's grown 3 inches taller than the so therefore this corn is taller than that the control, so the fertilizer works. That's rubbish science. Okay. Whereas in the risk of bias, you are going to make certain conclusions. There are very key things that you are looking at. So for example, selection bias, I've talked about that, how participants were selected and allocated to the group. There wasn't either deliberate or inadvertent skewing in the selection. And like I said, you put the very sick people in one arm and that kind of thing. performance bias, so how interventions were implemented and whether there were deviations from the intended intervention. So you started your intervention, and then along the line, you realize that it's not going as you wanted. Then you now start changing the intervention. Maybe you now start adding extra fertilizer, or you now start like changing the intervention of one arm or the other in one particular way. A more common one, for example, is if you have, let's say in a drug trial, you have very serious side effects. Of course, ethically, you are supposed to stop, but you must report it. And there's a way in which you can analyze it. We'll talk about that later. But if you don't report it and say that, oh, because of side effects, we stopped so number of people taking this particular drug, and you make it sound as if they all took the same dosage of drug for the same period of time, and then analyze it like that, that can be problematic, okay? Detection bias, how outcomes were measured and assessed is very important. In fact, this is why, especially in drug trials, we do double blinding. Single blind means the person who is entering the trial does not know whether they are in the treatment group or they're in the control group. Double blind means the person who is assessing the participant or the patient also doesn't know which group they are in. And why is that important? If I'm a doctor, and let's say for whatever reason, I also have my own bias that I want to believe that, let's say we are testing some new Bibidro, African drug, and I'm an African, so I'm eager to show that our medicine works as good as white man's medicine. I'm more likely, subconsciously or unconsciously, to ask questions in a way that will elicit the kind of answers from the patient. So when the patient comes out, Mama said, so what all? Mama, I'm sure you are fine. The headache has gone. That's a leading question, isn't it? Of course, even if the headache has gone, she doesn't want to embarrass. She's like, oh, doctor, okay, but it's only small. She will minimize its. I hope you understand how. So that's why it's important that the person also assesses, and depending on the context, like in a drug trial, for example, RCT, both the person, the subject or the patient, and the person assessing should not know which end. Because if I know that I am assessing those who are in the Bibidro or the African medicine trial, and I want to show that it works for patriotic reasons or whatever, it's possible that subconsciously, it may not be intentional. I may be biased in the way in which I assess those people compared to those who are on the, or maybe more commonly, maybe I have shares in the company of, that's more common. They are testing a drug and I'm a doctor or I'm a pharmacist and I've bought shares in that company, the new drug company, or maybe my boss has shares and I know my boss would want me to make him happy. So I'll assess it in a way that, that's why you must make sure that, that's what we call detection bias, if there are skills in how the outcomes are measured. Attrition bias, how incomplete data were handled and reported. Sometimes in drug trials, for example, or even in other trials, people drop out. That's inevitable. It's part of all research that we do. And anybody who has done research knows that there's always some level of attrition. But the point is that depending on the situation, the nature or the reason for the attrition can cause skews or bias. If, let's say, for example, your intervention is maybe it's good, but your intervention is so cumbersome, or maybe so culturally inappropriate, or whatever, that people drop out more in your intervention compared to the control. You may end up with a smaller number of people. So maybe you started out with 100 people in your intervention and 100 people in the control. And then at the end of the trial, 50 people drop out of intervention, only 10 drop out of the control. And then you don't report or investigate why, you just analyze it that way and find high treatment effect in your intervention. Is there a problem with that? Yes, because the question is, why are so many people dropping out? What is it about that's the question you should ask. Because when you come to the real world, you may show that yes, 50 people is still a large enough sample size to detect difference, but maybe the side effects of the drug or the intervention is so unacceptable. Maybe you are doing some intervention, you are, maybe in a Muslim community, and then you are asking them to use some sort of thing that has pork fat in it. And that's culturally acceptable for Muslims, for example. So they find out and then, no, this one is haram, I won't take it again. And then you think whatever it is that you've done, maybe the drug or whatever, is going to be effective in that community. It may be effective, but don't take it. Do you get the point I'm making? So that's an example. So sometimes attrition, you don't just turn a blind eye to it. And then of course, reporting bias, whether all expected outcomes were reported. And that's another reason why you should deposit your protocol to a third party so that when you go and do the study and you realize that some of the outcomes you were expecting were positive, but some of the ones you weren't expecting they don't make you look good. And then you now choose not to report those ones. You understand? So reporting bias, so yes, you did a study, but you suddenly went silent on some aspects that are not too flattering to what you want to say. You're supposed to say everything that you found, isn't it? So those are some of the things that a proper risk of bias will assess. Now, the last thing that I'll talk about risk of bias is, there won't be time to show, but because you are focusing more on the results in a risk of bias as opposed to quality assessment, where you are focusing more on the methodology. A risk of bias, in terms of outcomes, it will identify specific areas where bias may have influenced the study results. That's the whole point. So like all the biases that we talked about, because it's telling you that you are looking at the results, but you're looking at areas or aspects of maybe the methodology or whatever that could have influenced the result that you're coming to report. And that's what makes it a truly risk of bias assessment. And so in fact, truly speaking, the risk of bias, because it's focusing on results and whether you can trust it, especially in an RCT context, for example, you will assess the quality of the methods, but you will also do a very specific in assessing the quality of methods, you have a focus on certain biases that you are looking for. I don't even understand. So it's like you do both concurrently. It's not like one after the other. Just that you are looking at it from two different points of view. For the sake of time, I'm going to maybe I shouldn't skip it. So in the validation studies, for example, that I did, where you're looking at validations of tools, after we assess the methodology, okay, forget about this. This is a misnomer. That's what I'll say, that some people interchangeably use them. So in this COSMIN manual, they're using risk of bias interchangeably with quality assessment, which makes it more confusing. But here should have been quality assessment. This whole table is the actual risk of bias. So let me explain. So after we've done the assessment of the methodology of how they did the validation, we now came to the end results where they said they've done a structural validation to, let's say, the brief. Brief is one of the tools they use in executive function. Brief is an excellent tool in this South Asian population. Now I, as the assessor, are going to do a true risk of bias assessment where I'm going to say, no, your methodology was poor in A, B, C, D way. And therefore, using this particular algorithm, it's called GRADE. There's a whole, you'll see it in your notes. You start out by assuming that the tool is of high quality of evidence. And then you downgrade the tool for every risk of bias or inconsistency or imprecision. These are the sort of like the criteria I'm using to judge the results, sort of. Should we trust these results? So if there were serious problems with the methodology, and there's a table for how you do that, you can downgrade it by 1. So instead of saying it was of high quality, maybe you found serious problems with the methodology, so you downgrade it to moderate quality. Maybe you found very serious breaches in risk of bias, you downgrade it to low quality. Please help me are following. If you found maybe extremely serious, and I will explain how do you grade serious, very serious, extremely serious, you downgrade it by 3. Supposing you find out there were no problems with the bias, the quality assessment. I'm saying risk of bias because that's what I'm repeating, but this should be quality assessment. So you find that in the quality assessment, which is the methodology, everything was fine. They did it fantastically. However, there were inconsistencies in terms of the results of different papers. Some papers said the brief, which is the tool, is fantastic. Some people said the brief is not so great. I'm going to downgrade the true risk of bias or the grade by -1 from high quality of evidence to moderate. I hope you are following. Imprecision means sample size. So the quality assessment was fantastic, but the sample size, I found that maybe they used 50 to 100. It was small. I will downgrade it because it's imprecise. It may have given accurate results, but remember that target, it's imprecise. So it's scattered, a bit scattered. So I'll downgrade the quality. How much can we trust it? Because the sample size is not large enough, I'll say that, okay, instead of high, we'll say there's moderate quality of evidence to support the brief. If indirectness refers to the population that were used. Let's say the tool was meant to be used amongst adults. Or, okay, let's reverse it. It was meant to be used amongst children. And then some of the studies, they used a mixed population of both adults and children. That's what they mean by indirectness. They've mixed that population. So even if the quality assessment was good, sample size was great, all the studies were consistent saying that, oh, this tool is fantastic, but they were all mixing up the population other than what it was meant to be used in, I'll downgrade the true risk of bias, which is the grade assessment, by -1. Okay, so in terms of a practical outworking of the subtle differences between a quality assessment and a risk of bias, this is how it would work out. For example, if you are doing a validation tool, you can do a quality assessment for the methods, but when you do your risk of bias, so like I explained, so for example, with the population would skew or cause a certain bias in a certain way. And that's why we are downgrading the quality of the evidence, even though the quality assessment or the method was fine. Please, I hope I've not confused anybody. Yeah, hopefully I'm getting some vacant stares like, oh, you're tired. They are looking at me like, I know it's very abstract, but just, I want to communicate the principles of it. That the important thing is that quality assessment focuses on the methodology, how well it was. Risk of bias usually focuses on the results, but it will downgrade how much trust you can put in the results from that quality assessment based on certain factors that we believe will bias the results. Okay, please, I hope that's gone down well. Okay, don't worry, when you start, this is a bit abstract, but it's like you start practicing, you'll get a bit more. So this table, I'll leave it with you, but this is how the risk of bias is downgraded. There are multiple studies. Here, I mean quality assessment. It shouldn't have been risk of bias. So if the methodology, multiple studies of good quality, adequate quality methodology, or one study of very good quality methodology, then you say there's no risk of bias in terms of the true risk of bias assessment. Is that what we get? If there are multiple studies of doubtful quality, or there's only one study of adequate quality, then you're going to say serious, so you downgrade by just 1. If there are multiple studies of inadequate quality, or there's only one study of doubtful quality, you are going to downgrade by 2, very serious. If there's only one study of inadequate quality, then because of the methodology's quality, you will say that this is extremely serious, and therefore you will downgrade from high quality of evidence by 3 to what? Very low. That's one practical example of how this would work. For time's sake, this table is actually from my study results, the validation study. So you see up here that I have an overall rating. The plus means adequate, minus means inadequate, question mark means indeterminate. They didn't provide enough information for me to determine whether it was the methodology or the quality assessment was adequate or not. So that's this column. I've indicated that. So you see structural validity for this tool, which is brief. There was indeterminate, there was not enough information to make a judgment whether the structural validity studies was good enough. Internal consistency, it was good. The methodology for the internal consistency assessment of the tool was good. So I've put a plus over here. Cross-cultural validity, question mark. Reliability, that's another, whether when 2 different people administer the same questionnaire, they'll get the same results. Oh, sorry. That's one aspect of reliability. Here it was inadequate. But now there is a quality of evidence grading, which is the true risk of bias, based on either the quality assessment, inconsistencies or population, indirectness, blah, blah, blah. I now graded that this was very low. So whereas structural inconsistency was high, the methodology, everything was fine, population. So with this, for example, you can conclude based on just this line that for this tool, brief, which is a tool,
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You're saying you should go back to your last slide, please.
Go back to the last slide.
Slide on yes, someone is asking what's inconsistency.
I explained inconsistency. So, and the question about inconsistency, someone is asking about inconsistency. Inconsistency is when different papers are reporting inconsistent results about that tool or that intervention or that outcome. You understand? So when you are synthesizing the evidence for that particular tool, so let's say like the brief, let's say some people said, oh, brief is fantastic in developing countries. So, but some people say, no, brief is rubbish in developing countries after they have done their validation. When I'm summarizing what is the evidence for brief in Ghana, because of inconsistency, even if all of those papers were high quality in terms of quality assessment or methodology, because they were all good quality studies. So I can't fault any of the studies for the methods that they used. But the fact that they are all saying different things, I will say that because of inconsistency, the amount of trust I can put in brief based on the evidence available, I'll downgrade by either 1 or 2, serious or very serious, because of inconsistency. Okay, so please check if the person,
Say imprecision.
or imprecision rather. Imprecision is about sample size. Okay, so I showed you that target where you can have imprecision versus inaccuracy. Imprecision means that all the studies are saying roughly around the same thing. Okay, and usually this is heavily affected by sample size. Imprecision, if you have a large enough sample size, you are going to have more precise results. So let's say that in the brief, cumulatively, all the studies that have been done on that brief too, one study used only 20 people, one used 10, one used 30, when I add them one up, 70 people. That's not much. So even if it is high quality in terms of methodology, they use the right assessment, blah, 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 blah. When I come to doing the actual risk of bias assessment, I'll say that on the grounds of imprecision, because the sample size was between 50 to 100, I'm going to downgrade by 1 from high quality to moderate, because I can't put that much trust in it because there weren't enough people. Please, I hope that's clear now. So that's what I'm showing back here. So I'm showing an example of a summary result here. So this is brief to parents. Their structural validity was indeterminate. There was not enough information. However, their internal consistency was very good. All the several tools did the correct methods, had good quality assurance. And so I put a plus over there. And then when it came to the other criteria for risk of bias, true risk of bias, so quality assessment, inconsistency, imprecision, there was no problem with any of them. So therefore, I left it at very high. So in other words, I'm making a very nuanced statement about this too, that the evidence available shows that for its internal consistency, that particular type of validity, A1, all the studies that I found were good quality and there was no issue. However, when it comes to, for example, cross-cultural validity, which is what I was interested in, whether the two works as well or as it's meant to, if you take it from America to Ghana and ask Ghanaian children in Fantinu Town or Bukom or whatever, will it work the same way it's supposed to do? Most studies did not even do the things that we were supposed to do. There was not enough information. And for other reasons, I would say that there's very low quality of evidence, which we can't even determine whether it has good cross-cultural validity. When it came to reliability, in fact, it was negative, which means it was inadequate. All the studies show that it's not reliable. Okay, so that helps you make a very nuanced, so that you don't make a blanket statement like, this tool is good. This tool is good in what term? Or in what is good how? And that's one of the things that a systematic review will help you answer, because it will help you break down the issues, that the intervention is good for this group of people, but not for this group of people, or it's good in this way, but not in this way. So that you make a very nuanced, and then you not only grade the result, but you also grade the quality of evidence, which is what we call the risk of, in that strict sense, the risk of bias that we are talking about. Say, how much trust or can we hope? Is it high quality, medium, moderate, or whatever? So I think I'll pause here. Are there any questions? Because it's so important that we understand the difference. Several, okay.
Someone is asking if you do this for each paper.
Yes, so you do it for, the question is, do you do this for each paper? Yes, you do it. So to go back again, you do it for each study within the paper. But sometimes it's not one paper, one study. Some studies, like I've said, I'm using study in the strict sense, in the systematic review sense, or the critical appraisal sense. Okay, so you do it for each study. So like, for example, with this paper, right now I'm looking at the two, but there can be one paper where they looked at structural validity, internal consistency, or to use the RCT. Maybe they looked at the pharmacokinetic, or maybe they looked at, I don't know, I'm trying to stay away from health-related example. Maybe they looked at multiple things within that study that the particular intervention can do, sort of. So you are going to consider each of those as a single study. So you do this critical appraisal, both quality assessment and risk of bias for each study within the paper. And then depending on what you're looking at, because remember, you are not interested in the papers, you're interested in intervention. You want to see what different papers say about different interventions or different tools. So you look at different aspects of that intervention as individual studies. That's what I mean by a study within multiple studies within the paper. When you've done the assessment, you are also going to look at all other papers, the same thing, what they say about that intervention or that particular thing you are interested in. And then you are now going to, so you are going to do the same quality assessment and risk of bias. Then you are going to now synthesize or summarize all. So this is an example of a synthesis. So here, this one I've synthesized, I think there are about 12 papers that looked at briefs. And across all those 12 papers, this was a synthesis for each of them. So you're going to sort of like do it again across all the papers, both quality assessments and so on. So you summarize all the papers, what was the level of quality of their methods? You understand? But then all the papers, what was the results that they were reporting? And how much trust can we have in those results? That's what you are doing. As I'm saying, like, this thing is not a joke. Systematic review is not a joke.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have another question.
yeah.
Someone is saying for each
I'll
study.
take one here and then I'll take one in the audience.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Someone is asking for each study within the paper,
Yeah.
like,
Oh, I should explain that a bit more.
yes, sir.
Okay, so it's hard to say because you have to go into, it's different for different types of studies, but again, using the tools, the assessment tools. So, okay, let me explain this way. If I say I'm looking at a tool that is assessing, someone should give me an example from the audience. I don't want to use a health one. A tool that assesses what? 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 Say, I didn't hear you. Okay, a tool assessing cash transfers. You want to see the effectiveness of, oh, no, so sorry, the cash transfer will be the intervention. But you want to assess, the tool assesses the outcome, okay? So you want to assess, let's say, the effect of cash transfers on, okay, let's do something else. On, no, cash transfer, how will it impact the environment? A different, okay, environmental, okay, let's say we are looking at the environmental impact of, what can we look at?
Let me give my example.
Okay, give an example.
My name is Michael Watson from Faculty of
Agric,
Agriculture.
good. I like agric examples.
I am into animal nutrition.
Great.
One of the controversial issues is being able to convince farmers
Yeah,
to use feed-grade enzymes.
great.
Even to us, the nutritionists, some of us believe that enzymes do work.
Okay,
Others also think that they don't work.
okay,
It's only a chemical.
okay,
Yeah, my main question was on the sample size.
Right.
Maybe you can answer that.
Yes. right.
If I'm doing such an experiment in the lab,
Yeah,
I'll get a certain number of animals.
yeah.
And the intervention will be enzyme application.
Application to their feed.
Yes.
Okay.
And on the other side, I would have the normal feed without the
The
enzyme.
enzymes. Mhm.
You are compared them.
Mm,
In the scenario that I have described,
mm.
I would have to have replications. And that will be based on certain, the statisticians will tell you that the power of the experiment.
Yeah.
You will do that calculation.
Yeah.
But if I want to do meta-analysis,
Mhm,
even though my target is for poultry farmers,
mhm.
because in Ghana, the poultry is more established than.
Any others?
But if you go outside Africa,
Yeah.
you realize that they are more interested in piggery
Pigs.
than in poultry.
Very good.
So if you are doing meta,
Analysis of that.
yeah, there will be more data for pigs
Pigs.
than for poultry.
Fantastic example.
Yeah, so that's.
How do you synthesize? Very good. I'll use that to explain. Very good. So in this case, your intervention is enzymes being added to feed. Does it really have a positive impact on the animals or not? Great. Now you are interested in chickens because that's what is pertaining here. And then you say that, okay, so in my project, I'm going to do a systematic review of the impact of enzymes on the nutrition of pigs, of chickens. And maybe you pick your outcomes, maybe the average weight of the birds, maybe the average number of eggs they lay. I don't know. I mean, you are the agric person, number of eggs they lay, that type of thing. So there are about 3 outcomes that you are going to study. Fantastic. Now, you look at all the papers that are available on that enzyme. The enzyme is what you're interested in. And you realize that, for example, like I was saying, let's say they are all good quality. Let's assume that the methodology was sound. They did randomization, they did blah, 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 sample size, everything perfect. But because the majority of papers out there were using, what's the word? I have to find this one. Indirectness in multiple populations other than what you are interested in. You can't conclude that even if all the quality was perfect and everything, and then they are saying that therefore, oh, enzymes are good. you can't confidently conclude that therefore they will be good for chickens. You understand? Because your populations were diverse. So your quality assessment will be top notch. You would give them a top grade, either adequate or whatever you are using. But then when it comes to your risk of bias, because of the bias of the heterogeneity of the population, you have to downgrade from high quality to moderate or low, depending on how diverse the population was. You understand? So you conclude that, okay, instead of saying that there's high quality evidence for enzyme addition in feed for chickens, because, and that's another thing, every systematic review you do, you are making a very, very precise statement about something very specific. Scoping reviews, you are making a general overview. Systematic review, you are saying something very precise about a very specific scientific question. Is enzyme addition to feed good or beneficial for chickens in Ghana or maybe let's not even together, or maybe in Africa or whatever? You understand? So to make that statement, you cannot conclude concretely because of the heterogeneity. So therefore, you have to downgrade because of that risk of bias, downgrade by 1. If, however, you found that in the methodology, as you were looking at it, there were problems with the quality in the quality assessment, you realize that there were problems with the methodology of several of the papers. Then you are going to downgrade by either serious, very serious, or extremely serious quality assessment inadequacies. Do you follow what I mean? So the end result of the impression you will make about the intervention depends on your assessment of all these things. Somebody asked about something. I've lost track. Have I answered the question that was asked? It was our impression. So okay. I think I've answered both questions. Exactly. So basically, you are just acting like a headmaster or an examiner and critically assessing. And it's good for you because believe me, and I recommend it for anybody, especially PhD students. You know, it's a lot of hard work, but trust me, there's no better way of really learning the subject matter of whatever thing you're coming to do in your PhD or in your project than doing a systematic review. Because when you've examined with such a critical eye, now you know the eye with which whatever you are doing, how people are going to assess you. You understand the criteria that people are going to. So like for your study, like your study, for example, if you do a systematic review, you therefore know that, hey, I can't do any nonsense method. I have to check, make sure the sample size is top notch. I have to make sure this, because you've lashed people for messing up on those things. So you say, I buy the ball, thank you. For the international audience, the English version is what? The rod, the cup that you use to, there's the biblical version. I see Susukua or Susuma. How do you say it in English? It's the same thing. Yes, what do unto others as you expect them to do unto you. I think that's a simple one. I'll say. But basically, yes.
What is good for good is good for the Ganges.
Sorry?
What is good for the goose is also good for the gander.
Thank you very much, my brother. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Exactly. So you do that, and then you are. I think you are much more aware and much more careful. That and it also helps you see, and it's also good for you because it helps you see how to write a good abstract. That's one of the unintended consequences. Because when you are doing your abstract screening, you realize how many rubbish abstracts people write. People don't know how to write abstract, and it's true, it's an afterthought. After you've done the whole paper or the whole thing, then we are rushing, then you just write anything. But when you've done a systematic review, you know what critical information people are looking for when they are skimming your abstract, so that you know how to write your abstract, so that your abstract will get more cited, because you put all the relevant information that most people are looking for, you know. Okay, great, fantastic questions there. Okay, there's one more. Yeah. Yes. Great. Say the name again. Yes.
The question where normally students are informed.
Great. So if you are studying, interactors has to do with the population that you are studying. Okay, it's not about any other thing. You are only interested in the population that you are studying, what you want to make a conclusion about. If you are doing a research work in education and you want to say, okay, maybe it's increased contact hours beneficial for lower primary students, or let's say upper primary students. Doesn't matter whether they have 80 hours contact with the teacher as opposed to maybe 100 hours. And then you decide to do a systematic review. And then you realize that you are interested in, I don't know which level of education you do basic and very fantastic. So as if I knew, I read your mind there. So I'm a psychiatrist, so I can read people's minds. I'm joking. So basic education. So upper primary, let's say upper primary, you're interested in upper primary. And then you realize that all the studies that are out, although let's say lower primary, but for some reason, nobody's interested in researching into lower primary. Almost all the studies are JSS, secondary school. And I have FSHS, so everybody's concerned about saying secondary school JSS. And then you found only few studies that looked at lower primary. Even if the studies are of good quality, they use the right sample size, the right methods, whatever conclusion they came, let's say they came to a conclusion that yes, maybe 80 hours is no different. By the time you cross 60 hours of contact time, it doesn't matter whether you go to 100 or 80, the children have absorbed enough. Let's say that's the conclusion they came to. You can't make that conclusion with a lot of with high level of confidence because that's the studies that you analyzed or that you found were in older children. Do you understand? And in older children, maybe they have a better capacity of absorbing. I mean, they are different in terms of younger children. So even though, yes, the studies were quality, you found 10 studies, 7 of them were for JSS and secondary school. Only 3 looked at lower primary. You can still conclude that, yes, the evidence is that it makes no difference beyond 60 hours or maybe beyond 80 hours. However, I can only conclude with maybe moderate or low level of confidence in that evidence. In other words, you downloaded for imprecision because the population that you were interested in making a statement about, it wasn't exclusively or mostly them that you found evidence for. It was in another population. In other words, you are alerting your reader that yes, the evidence was there, but it may not work especially because there are differences in the population. So like chickens versus pigs, lower primary versus JHS, their capacity to absorb a test. Please, I hope you understand. So it translates all across depending on what you are looking at. This table just shows the diversity of, there's a question. One more, yes. Yeah. Absolutely, fantastic. You are in the spirit. So in fact, the Cosmin, for example, the tool that I used, gave reviewers 2 options. You can either decide, in terms of how do you handle mixed population, you can either decide to, especially if maybe you're not getting enough studies. So if let's say you found only 5 studies, already now you're struggling to find studies on the topic. So removing some will make the level of analysis on way. So either you decide to include it but downgrade because of imprecision, or if you find a lot of studies, you can just exclude. So like for example, I was interested in executive functions amongst children. So I excluded all executive functions in adults, in old age, and this, and I had enough studies. But there were a few where they mixed, they didn't do it in either children or they mixed the populations. So there was a way in which they show you how to calculate. I think in Cosmin, they said if it's 75% of studies were of the homogeneous population you're interested in, so like mine, it was children, you can ignore it. But if you find, I think, between 75 and 50, then you have to downgrade by 1. If you find between this and that kind of thing. So they'll give you the instructions if you decide to include them, maybe because of numbers, how to downgrade it. But absolutely, it's a decision that you can make, but you must state it in your methodology that I excluded studies or I included, but rather downgraded, so that people know what you are doing. Okay, that's a good question. All right. Yeah, so these are examples of 15 minutes for the whole 1 hour. Hey, then we didn't do the activity. Okay, but I've done a lot of, okay, so I'll round up quickly. The rest are all just, we'll go after this table, we'll go straight to the activity. These are examples of tools that can be used depending on what you are doing. So if you are doing an RCT, for example, the ROB2, okay, I've sent it around. You should all have received it. It's used in RCTs. It's used in risk or bias assessment or quality assessment for randomized control trials. If you want to do rather another kind of intervention study, you want to assess intervention studies that are not randomized. Sometimes intervention studies are not randomized. You can't randomize it depending on maybe ethics or whatever. So in those types of studies, you can use the Robin I. When you get the slides, it's actually a live live hyperlink, so you can click them. It will send you to the website, so you can download them. The Cosmin, like I said, is used in validity or adequacy of measurement properties of questionnaires. Probust, that's useful for studies that build models that look at like predictive models. So you want to assess which of these diagnostic tools or which of these prognostic measures, and you can use different things. You know, some sort of model that predicts what is the probability of cows developing, foot and mouth disease, and somebody has developed some sort of model for that if you input this data and this data. But somebody also has another model, or like polygenic risk scores. Those who are interested in genetic studies, you know, those are all predictive models that predict a certain outcome. Which of these models are best? You should use the Probust to assess studies which have sought to develop predictive models or prognostic models. And then diagnostic test accuracy. If you something which tests how well, you can use the QUADAS. So this was the paper, this was my paper, the systematic, or it was the scoping review, where I used the Cosmin to do that. I'll mention something about checklists. It's very confusing. Many people say they are looking for risk of bias assessment tools, but they end up with what we call checklists. A checklist is similar because they also outline criteria, but checklists are tools that just help you write or report. So after you've done your study and you want to write the manuscript, a checklist is a good way to make sure that you include all the relevant data that you will be assessed by if somebody does a systematic review. Okay, but a checklist does not give you a score, unlike a risk of bias assessment tool. Please, I hope you understand the difference. A risk of bias assessment tool will help you grade the quality of paper. So it's the same thing, but from different angles. So when you are writing your paper, you can use checklists, and there are many of them. I'll show you a website where you can download whichever ones you want to, depending on whether you're doing a systematic review or whatever. Sorry, RCT or whatever. Whereas a risk of bias assessment tool will help you grade it, or will help you assign scores or value to all those criteria. Okay. Yeah, so you go to the Equator Network, the website there. There are loads and loads of them. Yeah, they are, yes, held by us, but most of them you can actually adapt it. So in an RCT, this is the flow. And these are where problems can go. You recruit your patients, you must randomize, and then you must put them into an intervention arm versus comparator arm, follow-up outcomes. And I'm mentioning this because this is, in terms of your quality assessment / risk of bias assessment, these are the places that you're going to focus on. If you are going to, so using the ROB2 tool, for example, was randomization adequate? The intervention, did they do the intervention in a proper systematic way, or they botched it up? And then, of course, the outcomes, like I was telling you, did they make sure that the person assessing the outcome was blinded? Was the outcome assessed with the correct tools? Those are where your risk of biases are going to appear. And so any risk of bias tool, this is just a simplified picture, because the tool is, you'll see, if you open the ROB2, it's 70-something pages. It can be very overwhelming. But just understand that these, in a nutshell, this is what you are assessing to see whether they did a good enough job. So in the risk of bias, in the ROB2, these are some of the questions. Was allocation sequence random? I won't go into too much of this because of time. In the risk of bias, something called intention to treat versus per protocol. So in an RCT. So basically, you can analyze the data based on whether participants were analyzed in the same arm as they have been randomized to, regardless of whether they completed the treatment or not. So let's say you put two sets of participants, one in your treatment arm. Let's use the enzyme feed one. So we put a set of chickens on enzyme feed, a set on feed as usual. But then as you start, you realize that those in the enzyme feed, some of them are developing reactions for some sort, and so you have to they have to drop out of the trial, remove them. Or maybe some who were in the feed as usual suddenly started also getting started, so you wanted to switch them back to the enzyme feed. If you decide to analyze the data in a way such that the original arms that you assign them to is where you analyze them in terms of their outcomes, you are doing an intention to treat. And that has its advantages. But if you want to analyze based on the true picture of who actually got the intervention, that's what we call a per protocol. And so that's what I've summarized over here. So using drug trial, for example, you could have a situation where you want to see whether a new drug works better than the standard treatment. And whereas that some participants in the placebo group switch to take the new drug by themselves. And then they come and report to you that, doctor, this, I don't like it, so I've gone to join this other group on my own. People do that. Human beings are human beings. You can't control them. Or realize that some people stop taking the drug because of side effects, or some participants were lost to follow up, right? In the intention to treat analysis, participants who stop taking the new drug or who switch to the old place will still be analyzed for their outcome as if they were part of their old group, because that was their intention. And the reason is why that is sometimes is done is that you want to, because that mimics real life situation, which is a problem with a lot of these experiments. Sometimes experiments are sort of like so artificial, because in real life, you're not going to be able to control whether, I mean, we see it all the time in the hospital. You prescribe a drug for the patient, he goes over and comes back and says, doctor, no, you don't have a fire, but I also now went to get a Akuma APC or some Dido. My grandmother also gave me some herbs and I added it, but your drug is not working. I'm like, but you added the herbs, how do you know it's not my drug? You'll be here all the time. People go and add all sorts of things to treatment. We do it all the time. So in real life, the point is that the intention to treat mimics real life, because people will cross over, people will stop because of side effects, so on and so forth. So when you analyze the results, even though they switch, you analyze them in their original groups. Of course, the effect size of your treatment will reduce because those people will dilute the true effect of your drug. But it will give you a picture of what will happen in the real world if that drug is introduced. So if that's your intention or that's why you're doing the randomized trial, that may be a good model for you. But if you are doing it just to really prove that your drug works, then that one you have to use the per protocol. So that one, if people switch, you take them out, you take that data out and only analyze those who only truly got the drug. Please, I hope you understand that small difference. These are the advantages. I've explained that already. You can look at it. This, if you're going to use the ROB2, this is the algorithm that you use to figure out whether to conclude whether there is low risk of bias, some concern, or high risk of bias based on your assessment of things like randomization, various questions that you answer. But like I said, we are not going to go into really the depths of it. So maybe we'll do a practical activity. How do I click escape? I want to, let's use the Cosmin one, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. I brought two papers. So if you can open, for those who have the paper, open the Karim 2012 paper. And then open the Cosmin so you have just 10 minutes, so how much? It's already here. Oh, okay, so the time is up. Okay, so then let me show you what to look out for that one because of time. Just quickly summarizing. But then I have another presentation at 1, so by 12 I have to make.
If you show them what
they can do it. Okay, fine. So I'll show you what to do. We are going to do two things. Maybe you can do it during your lunch break whilst you are eating. We are going to do. We are going to assess. So I'll use the Cosmin one to assess structural validity and internal consistency of the brief tool. In fact, I've shown you the results already. So if you open the paper called by Karim 2012, and then you open the risk of bias assessment tool, which is the Cosmin. I think if you go to page, I don't remember, it's 5, section 5.1. So I think page 47 or something like that. It must have been in the email that I sent. But the section that talks about risk of bias assessment, I just want to quickly show you what how to do it. Fantastic. So let's quickly scroll down. Fantastic. Risk of bias checklist of Cosmin. So you can see this is page 47. I was right. So box 1, box 3 says structural validity. We are assessing the structural validity reported in Karim 2012. Karim 2012 says they did an adaptation. That paper did an adaptation of the brief in Portuguese in Brazil. And then they said they did a structural validation. They validated brief and they did internal content. They did other things, but they're just looking at structural validation. You don't have to know what structural validation is, but you can still assess it based on just following the criteria. Okay. Box 3 says that the scale consists of effect indicators. Okay, don't forget about box 3. This is a bit technical. Let's scroll down to statistical methods. Good. So here, so look at this. It says, just for your orientation, measurement property structural validity refers to the model fit of a factor analysis on all items. Basically, it's saying that if you're looking at structural validity in the new population, does the tool break down into the structures or the domains that it was originally designed to? So if, let's say, the tool is supposed to have 3 domains, it's supposed to assess X, Y, Z. But then in your new population or your new translation, when you analyze it with factor analysis, it only breaks down into 2 domains. That means your new population or your new translation doesn't have structural validity. Please, I hope you understand. Because imagine you are measuring wealth. And wealth, we are saying that your tool measures wealth in the domain of, let's say, income, how much money you have, the domain of assets, how much property you have, and then maybe the domain of, I don't know, something abstract like well-being, how happy you are. And when you now translate the two into, let's say, tree or ga or something, somehow the answers don't break down into 3 domains or into 3 factors. They break down into 2. That means there's something wrong with the 2. Maybe the way you translated certain items where you are asking about well-being, people are thinking about it only as income, because the way you translated it, well-being means money, and you have money in your pocket is well-being. Please, I hope you understand. That's a rough idea of. So it means that there's a problem with your translation. Therefore, your translation does not have structural validity. So, but how do you assess that? You have to do something we call a factor analysis, either a confirmatory factor analysis of the answers that people give or exploratory. So all you do is to assess the structural validity, whether they did a good structural validity, what method did they use? In the Karim 2012, did they use, it says for CCTV's classical test theory, was exploratory or confirmatory factor analysis performed? So you just go through their methods, either the methods and data analysis. You don't read the whole paper, just go straight to data analysis of methods in their paper. And they'll say, oh, after collecting the data, we performed the factor analysis. We used blah, 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 blah to analyze. You're asking yourself a simple question. Did they use confirmatory factor analysis, exploratory factor analysis, or they didn't use either of these 2? If they use confirmatory factor analysis, that's the best. That's what you're supposed to use. You rate them as very good on question 1 of structural validity analysis. If they use exploratory, you rate them as what? Adequate. I hope you can see. If they didn't, and that's the one I was saying that you will see that in the paper, I've highlighted it. These people rather use something called a principal component analysis, PCA. So without even you being an expert in validation, you are just reading the paper and saying, did they do this? Yes, no. Do this? Yes, no. Highlight and answer. And that's it. So anybody here can do a systematic review of something that is very technical like this. So that's when you have the chance, go through the paper, open the Cosmin checklist, and only check for question 1, exploratory factor analysis. Forget about, did you use IRT, so skip that. And then go to sample size, question 3. So you just answer these 2 questions. Was the sample size adequate for the analysis? And it's telling you that if they used 7 times the number of items and just more than 100. So the number of items is the number of questions on the questionnaire. And so if the first thing you have to do is go to either the beginning, there's always a section in the methods about measures, and to tell you, oh, we use the brief has 50 questions, or this, actually in this particular case, it's 86. It's 86 items on the questionnaire. So they are telling you, this Cosmin is telling you that the correct sample size for them to have used is 7 times the number of items. So 86, quick calculation. 86 times 7 is what? Let me get my phone out. You can check 86 times 7 86 times 7, 602. So ideally, they are supposed to have recruited 602 parents or people, minimum. Then you now go and check how many would they recruit? Was it? And Cousin is also saying, and that number must also be more than 100. So in other words, let's say in case the items were just 3 or 4 questions, and you multiply by 7, you can't therefore use 3, 7, 21. You have to use 100 and above. But in this case, 602 is above 100. So this is how you understand. So just check for question 3 on the Cosmin. There was a sample size adequate. Check the number of items, multiply by 7. If it was above that, then it was very good. If it was at least 5 times the number of items, so 86 times 5, I think that came to 430 or something, or 420 something. If it was above 420 something, then you say it is adequate. If, however, it was less than either of these two, either 5 times more than the number of items or 7 times more, then sample size is doubtful. You understand? So that's how you graded that one. And then on the second paper, if you have the chance, there's an RCT paper that I gave randomized, but that one is actually from Agric, from Agric Business. That one is a paper looking at, they gave, it was in Tanzania, they gave microcredits loans to farmers, and so wanted to see whether it will influence their adoption of technology, of whether the farmers will use it to buy fertilizers and so on and so forth in Tanzania. Okay, open the second paper. No, so open the paper itself.
Karim, right?
No, the Karim is the Cosmin paper. So open Nakano 2012. Or no, rather open the ROB 2. ROB 2, yes. So in the second paper, we are going to use the ROB 2 to assess, only assess randomization. Where is it? Why am I not seeing it? Okay. Detailed guidance from randomization. Yeah, so I think that's on page 10. So you can just quickly read a little bit about randomization, but you are starting your assessment from approach to sequencing to sequence generation. Yeah, yes. Oh, the question, let me finish one and I'll give you, or you get confused. Okay, ask the question, the previous one. Yes. The items is the number of questions on the questionnaire. You know, they're assessing the validity of the questionnaire. Okay, and Cosmin is telling you that the adequate sample size depends on the number of items or questions on the questionnaire. So if it's a questionnaire, it's a 50-item questionnaire. For it to be very good, you are supposed to use 7 times the number of items on the questionnaire. So 50 times 7. You understand? So it means what you do is that you just come to the paper where they talk about sample size. Look, before that, you go to the paper where they talk about measures. Look at the number of items on the questionnaire. And I'll say that in this particular paper, it's actually 86 items. And then you multiply so that you know that the minimum sample size they are supposed to meet for very good is 86 times 7. For adequate, it is 5 times the number of items, so 86 times 5. So you have these two numbers in your head. Then you go and look at the sample size that they actually recruited. If it's below either the 7 times, which is very good, or the 5 times, you grade them as doubtful. Very simple. Yes. Yes. That's not even the question. You are assessing how well those people who did the validation, how well did they do the validation? They say they've done better validation. And Cosmin is telling you that best practice, you must have a certain sample size with it. So at the end of the day, you synthesize all that. I mean, we can't go into it now. Then for the RCT one, we are only looking at the randomization. Answer only 2 questions. Whether there was the approach to sequence generation. You know, in randomization, you are supposed to generate random sequences, random sequence. So either most people use computer generated, or in the old school days, you use like a table, random numbers. If they don't state how they generated their random numbers, because you say you're randomly assigning, isn't it? How do you random? Was it a C, or how do you do it? You understand? So if they don't state it, then you say not enough information. If they state it, but it was not one of the ones that Rob, you are going to read over here, either computer or something, you grade them as no or probably not in terms of the question is, was there adequate vowel sequence? So no or probably not. Yeah.
Say that how they randomize
The people,
that is happening.
yes. It's supposed to be stated in the paper. So if it's not stated, not enough information. If it's stated, but it's not an adequate method, you say no or probably not. Please help you understand. And so look at from page 10, answer the question of approach to sequence generation. And then I highlighted, 4.1122, allocation, concealment, and failure of randomization. So they're supposed to conceal who was allocated to what. Like the participant is not supposed to know whether they've been put into treatment arm or non-treatment arm. So if the people don't state how they conceal that from the participants, that's a low grade. And then the last one that you should look at is, I've highlighted it here. Assess sequence generation. Okay, no, that's the assessing what, so sorry, there's what I've stated already. Assessing random sequence generation. I think I've already given the answer. So here I've highlighted that if they only state that, a simple statement such as we randomly allocated, without saying how they randomly allocated, they don't say how the randomization was done. That means it says what? Using randomized design is often insufficient to be confident that the allocation sequence was generally randomized. So you grade them as probably not. That's what Rob is saying. Which tells you that if you are doing an RCT, please make sure you report not just, we randomly allocated. You all say it, don't say that. Say how you randomly allocated, the computer generated or whatever. How did you blind them? And that's what they're talking about. Concealment of allocation. How do you make sure that those who are being But I'll say something very quickly important here. It's not in every context that thing works. So for example, if you are working with chickens, I'm not going to blind chickens. So in fact, it's an important lesson. I tried it to my customer that at the end of the day, you are in charge of using the tool as you want to. As long as you stay, so you must modify certain things to what makes suitable sense. It's not that you are just blindly following what they say. You understand? So depending on the context, if you realize that the tool is asking you to create a certain way, but it doesn't make sense in the context of what you are doing, just take that as a caveat that in your methodology, that in my assessment, the tool says I should do this, but I modified it this way, or I excluded, or I ignored this because of this. Okay, you're allowed to do that, as long as you state it. So like in my case, in the Cosmin has been designed for questionnaires. How do you assess questionnaires as tools? That there were some assessment tools where it's not a questionnaire, it's an activity to assess the child's executive function. So they look at the way the child is playing or whatever. So it's not every item on the Cosmin that I can apply to assessment of an activity. So those design modifications I said, for this maybe question, assessment criteria, I didn't do it because it makes no sense, it doesn't apply to this particular tool. But for where it was a questionnaire, I applied it. Okay, so you are the driver, you decide what to do as long as you state what to do. So you must be an active consumer of I think I'll stop here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. So,
That's what I've just explained to them.
so because of time, we will not take additional questions. We have to move quickly to the next presenter. Axie has been waiting.